History remembers what the Nazis did, the death camps, the invasions, the genocide. But there's another story, equally terrifying, what they planned to do if they'd won. These weren't just fantasies scribbled in notebooks. These were detailed blueprints, engineered plans, and systematic preparations for a world reshaped in Hitler's image. What follows isn't alternate history, it's documented Nazi ambition, the horrifying vision of a future where evil triumphed and remade the entire planet. These are the plans that show us just how far the darkness was meant to spread. Germania. Hitler hated Berlin. He saw it as too modern, too Jewish, too cosmopolitan. So he planned to destroy it completely and rebuild it as Germania, the capital of his 1,000-year Reich and the center of the entire world. Albert Speer, his chief architect, led this insane 20-year, 500 million Reichsmark project to demolish central Berlin and relocate residents into homes stolen from deported Jews. The core design featured two massive boulevards intersecting to form a gigantic cross over the city. Nazi symbolism literally carved into the urban landscape. The north-south axis would stretch 5 kilometers, serving as a grand parade route with all normal traffic diverted into underground highways. At the heart would be the Grosser Platz, a plaza covering 350,000 square meters, larger than anything the world had ever seen. It would be flanked by the Führer's palace, the new Reich Chancellery, and the Army High Command. But the centerpiece was the Volkshalle, the People's Hall. Designed by Hitler himself, it was planned to be the largest enclosed building ever constructed, over 200 meters tall, 250 meters wide, seating 180,000 people. The assembly square in front would dwarf St. Peter's Square in Rome. In the south, an Arc de Triomphe knockoff scaled up to nearly 100 meters tall would tower over Paris's original. Germania's massive scale had one purpose: make supporters feel awed and enemies feel powerless. Small, insignificant insects before the might of the Reich. The Nazis even tested Berlin's soil with a 12,600-ton concrete cylinder built by French forced labor. It still stands today, a monument to madness that was never built. The Lebensborn program. Before the Nazis could conquer the world, they needed soldiers, millions of racially pure Germans to populate their empire. The solution was Lebensborn, a state-run breeding program that turned women into production units for the Reich. Established in 1935 and run by the SS, Lebensborn initially provided maternity homes and financial incentives to racially valuable women who agreed to bear children for Germany, often outside marriage. These women were encouraged, sometimes coerced, to partner with SS officers or other genetically screened men. Pregnancy became patriotic duty. The program awarded the Gold Honor Cross of the German Mother to women who bore 8 or more children, treating motherhood as military service. Women weren't people, they were breeding stock. Their worth measured in how many future soldiers they could produce. But Lebensborn got darker. As Germany conquered territory, the program began kidnapping children from occupied countries: Poland, Ukraine, Yugoslavia, who looked Aryan enough. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the right skull measurements. These children were stolen from their families, given German names, and placed with SS families to be raised as Germans. Their real identities were erased. Himmler's ultimate goal? A German population of 200 million racially homogeneous people. To achieve this, Martin Bormann and Himmler planned post-war reforms allowing war heroes to legally marry multiple wives, institutionalized polygamy to boost birth rates. The program planned massive expansion across conquered territories. Maternity homes would dot the landscape from France to the Urals, all churning out the next generation of the master race. Women would be honored, celebrated, and utterly controlled, their bodies property of the state, their children soldiers for the Reich. Lebensborn reveals the Nazi vision at its most coldly systematic. Humans reduced to livestock, love replaced with breeding quotas, families manufactured according to racial specifications. This wasn't just eugenics, it was industrial-scale human production, turning the miracle of life into another assembly line, serving Hitler's empire. The Breitspurbahn. Hitler didn't just want to conquer Europe, he wanted to connect it, binding his empire together with the most ambitious railway project ever conceived, the Breitspurbahn, a super wide-gauge railway network spanning the entire Greater Germanic Reich and beyond. Designed with a 4-meter gauge, over twice the standard width. These weren't ordinary trains. They were mobile palaces of Nazi propaganda, each car 6 meters wide and 7 meters tall. fully stacked with chandeliers, restaurants, a cinema, glazed viewing platforms, bathtubs, showers, hair salons, and even pastry shops. The project was prioritized in 1941, granted 84,000 tons of steel despite wartime shortages. Hitler envisioned these super trains replacing maritime shipping entirely, creating high-speed connections from Berlin to Moscow, Munich to the Mediterranean, and deep into Eurasia. One key route would link Upper Silesia to the Donets Basin, connecting Germany's industrial heartland to conquered Soviet resources. But these luxury trains had a darker purpose. They were designed for military use, with ammunition storage, space for tanks and troops, and even anti-aircraft installations hidden under retractable domes. German soldiers could ride in comfort to the front, then the same trains would return, loaded with plundered resources and enslaved workers. The Breitspurbahn was Hitler's vision of total continental dominance made physical, rails binding his empire together, too wide for any other nation's trains to use, ensuring Germanic control of all movement and trade across Europe. Ultimately, no Breitspurbahn trains were ever built. Some design documents ended up in Soviet hands after the war, testaments to ambitions that died with the Reich. The Madagascar Plan. Before the gas chambers, before Auschwitz, the Nazis had a different solution to what they called the Jewish question. Deport every Jew in Europe to Madagascar, turning the entire island into an open-air prison ruled by the SS. Proposed in 1940 by Franz Rademacher and enthusiastically supported by Hitler, the plan imagined relocating 1 million Jews per year over 4 years, 4 million total. Adolf Eichmann, who would later organize the Holocaust, outlined the process: forced resettlement, seizing all Jewish assets to fund deportation, and establishing a Jewish territory under strict German oversight. Madagascar was chosen precisely because of its perceived harshness: remote, underdeveloped, tropical, a place where Europeans weren't meant to thrive. The deportees were expected to die from exposure, disease, and starvation. This wasn't resettlement, it was slow-motion genocide disguised as relocation. The plan imagined limited Jewish self-governance, but all under SS authority, with German naval and air bases securing dominance over the island. Jews would be trapped, unable to leave, slowly dying, while the Nazis could claim they'd solved the problem without explicitly murdering anyone. After defeating Britain, the Nazis planned to use the captured British fleet for transport across the Indian Ocean. But by late 1941, the Madagascar Plan was abandoned. Why? Because the Nazis found a more efficient solution: systematic genocide in Eastern Europe's death camps. Madagascar shows how Nazi evil evolved, from deportation to extermination, always seeking the most complete destruction of those they hated. The Führermuseum. Adolf Hitler fancied himself an artist, and he planned to prove it by creating the greatest art museum in the world, built on stolen treasures and constructed with slave labor. The Führermuseum was to be a gigantic building complex in Linz, Austria, near Hitler's birthplace. It would dwarf Paris's Louvre, featuring an art museum, library, opera house, and theater, all in one massive structure, the cultural centerpiece of the Reich. The collection would showcase Hitler's preferred 19th-century German Romantic and Realist paintings, while rejecting all modern art, which he vilified as degenerate and Bolshevik. As the Nazis conquered Europe, they systematically looted, confiscated, or purchased artworks destined for this museum. Linz itself was to be transformed into a cultural capital eclipsing Vienna, which Hitler despised for its modernist tendencies and Jewish influence. The city would be filled with neoclassical architecture, projecting Nazi ideological values, the new heart of German culture, realized through forced labor from concentration camps like Mauthausen nearby. Hitler invested enormous personal interest in this project, sketching building layouts himself and constantly discussing details. Though the museum was never constructed, thousands of artworks were already collected and stored, initially in Munich, later hidden in salt mines at Altassee, before Allied forces captured them. The Führermuseum wasn't about art, it was about erasing cultures, stealing heritage, and replacing it with Hitler's vision of approved beauty. The Greater Germanic Reich. The Greater Germanic Reich wasn't just a larger Germany, it was a plan to restructure the entire European continent into a racial hierarchy, with Germans at the top and everyone else as slaves, subjects, or corpses. Hitler's new order envisioned direct annexation of Austria, Bohemia, Western Poland, Alsace-Lorraine, and more into an enlarged German state, These territories would be completely absorbed, their populations either Germanized or eliminated. Surrounding regions would become satellite states, puppet governments serving Berlin. Spain, Portugal, and Italy were expected to fall under total German control. The western frontier aimed to restore borders from the Holy Roman Empire, bringing in all of Wallonia, French-speaking Switzerland, and much of northern and eastern France. Britain, rather than being annexed, was seen as a potential naval ally. British men would provide industrial slave labor. British women were to be impregnated by German soldiers to Germanize Britain over generations. The Channel Islands would become strength-through-joy vacation resorts for German workers. Ireland, once occupied, would be unified and governed together with Britain as a single subordinate territory. But the regime's real focus was eastward. Lebensraum, living space, aimed to colonize vast areas of Eastern Europe, pushing Germany's reach to the Ural Mountains. Under Generalplan Ost, this expansion would all the deaths of man, suffering, self-control, ill-human, and worldly parole of the too wild man. Slavs, Jews, Roma, and others, deemed inferior, would be removed, murdered, or deported to make way for German settlers. The surplus Russian population west of the Urals would be forcibly relocated into Siberia to die. Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians were marked for Germanization. Their cultures erased, their languages banned, their identities replaced with German ones. The plan detailed exactly how to destroy entire peoples. Major cities would be razed, infrastructure would be demolished, education would be eliminated to keep surviving populations ignorant and servile. The remaining Slavs would be kept as agricultural laborers, deliberately underfed and overworked, slowly dying out while Germans took their land. Generalplan Ost wasn't theoretical. It was a detailed blueprint with population targets, timelines, and resource allocations. Nazi planners calculated they'd need to eliminate 30 to 50 million people to achieve their goals. They worked out the logistics of mass murder with the same efficiency they applied to industrial production. This was genocide as urban planning, ethnic cleansing as infrastructure development. The systematic murder of tens of millions presented as rational policy for living space. Poland was to be completely destroyed as a nation. The educated classes would be murdered. The rest would be reduced to illiterate farm labor. Warsaw would cease to exist. Poland would become a word that only appeared in history books, if the Nazis allowed such books to be written at all. Ukraine, with its rich agricultural land, would become the breadbasket of the Reich. Ukrainians themselves were considered expendable, useful only as temporary labor, until enough Germans could be settled to replace them. The Black Sea would become a German lake, surrounded by colonized territories. The Baltic states faced selective extermination. Those who looked German enough might be spared and forcibly assimilated. The rest would be deported or killed. National identities would be erased within a generation. Even the survivors would live in hell. The remaining Eastern European population would be denied education beyond simple counting and signing their names. They'd be forbidden to use contraception. The Nazis wanted them breeding, but only so there would always be a fresh supply of slave labor as the old ones died from overwork. Medical care would be withheld. No hospitals for Slavs, no doctors. Epidemics would be allowed to spread unchecked, reducing population naturally. The SS calculated that millions would die from natural causes, starvation, disease, exposure, without requiring active extermination, saving bullets and gas. The Greater Germanic Reich imagined a Europe where 200 million Germans ruled over tens of millions of slaves, with all other populations eliminated entirely. It was a plan for the largest act of ethnic cleansing in human history, making the actual Holocaust look like a preliminary experiment. And the terrifying truth? They started implementing it. Generalplan Ost wasn't just a document, it was policy. The mass murder of Soviet POWs, the starvation of Leningrad, the destruction of Warsaw, the Einsatzgruppen death squads, these were the opening phases of the plan. If Germany had won the war, this would have been our world, a continent of mass graves, a generation of orphaned children forcibly raised as Germans, and an empire built on bones, stretching from the Atlantic to the Urals. The Greater Germanic Reich represents Nazi ideology at its most expansive and most evil, genocide as geopolitics, mass murder as manifest destiny. The U.S. invasion. Hitler saw war with America as inevitable. He envied its size and resources while fearing its power. Conquering Europe was never the endgame. It was preparation for the real prize, the United States. Operation Pastorius was an early attempt to sabotage American infrastructure. In 1942, the Nazis infiltrated trained agents into the U.S. via soot and faced into the bottle for unfitting substance at the time. All the agents were captured, and 6 were executed, but Hitler's long-term invasion plan was far more ambitious. After expected victories over Britain and the USSR, he intended to massively expand the Kriegsmarine, building a navy capable of transporting millions of German troops across the Atlantic. 2 invasion routes were considered. First, a German-Japanese pincer attack via Alaska, moving down through coastal cities. Second, an assault from North Africa to New Orleans, using the Mississippi River as a highway to strike inland, splitting America in half. To support Atlantic operations, the Nazis planned to occupy the Azores, Canary Islands, and Cape Verde, creating forward bases for naval and air operations. The America Bomber project aimed to develop long-range bombers capable of reaching the American mainland, bombing New York and Washington into submission before invasion forces arrived. Hitler even envisioned defeated Britain joining Germany in this final war against America, combining the Royal Navy with the Kriegsmarine to create an unstoppable Atlantic fleet. But the invasion wasn't just military conquest. Hitler envisioned post-war occupation of the United States as a breeding ground. He viewed America as rich in Aryan blood due to European immigration, and admired its restrictive immigration policies and history of racial segregation, seeing America as already partially aligned with Nazi racial thinking. Under Nazi control, the U.S. would be stripped of racially inferior populations, African Americans, Jews, Latinos, through deportation or extermination. The remaining population would be Germanized, transformed into a racially pure extension of the Reich. German settlers would flood into the American Midwest, taking over farms and factories. English would be gradually replaced with German as the primary language. American culture would be erased, replaced with Nazi ideology taught in every school. The plan imagined using America's industrial capacity, once the source of Allied victory, to fuel further Nazi expansion. American factories that built tanks for democracy would build them for the Reich. American oil fields would fuel German war machines. American agriculture would feed the growing German population. This wasn't fantasy. Nazi engineers actually designed transatlantic troop carriers. Luftwaffe planners calculated fuel requirements for bombing runs to New York. The invasion of America was being planned with the same systematic detail as the invasion of Poland. The only reason it never happened? The Nazis lost the war before they could build the fleet, develop the bombers, and launch the operation. But make no mistake, if they'd conquered Europe and had a few more years to prepare, the invasion would have come. Hitler's plan for America reveals the ultimate scope of Nazi ambition. They didn't want to dominate Europe, they wanted to dominate the planet. In America, the symbol of freedom and democracy would be the ultimate prize, conquered, colonized, and converted into the western extension of the thousand-year Reich. Neuschwabenland. In 1938, Nazi Germany launched an Antarctic expedition, claiming part of Queen Maud Land as Neuschwabenland. The stated goal was extracting whale oil to reduce reliance on imports, but the real aim was pure propaganda, flaunting Germany as a global power with territorial claims on every continent. The expedition dropped thousands of metal swastikas across the frozen landscape, marking Nazi territorial claims. They photographed everything, mapped the coastline, and made grandiose declarations about German sovereignty over Antarctica. Plans for further expeditions to the Pacific side of Antarctica were considered, envisioning a network of German bases across the continent. The Nazis imagined research stations, whaling facilities, and eventually permanent settlements, Germans living at the bottom of the world, extending the Reich to the most routes soon slow the most expensive and strange, far-right spirit. But the bases were never built. The territorial claims meant nothing. Yet Neuschwabenland became the source of endless conspiracy theories. Secret Nazi bases, hidden submarines, UFOs, and Hitler's survival. None of it true, but the mythology persists because the actual plan was ambitious enough to fuel imagination. The Antarctic Empire shows how the Nazis thought globally. No corner of the planet was beyond their ambitions. If there was land to claim, they'd claim it. If there were resources to exploit, they'd take them. Even the frozen wastes of Antarctica weren't exempt from Hitler's vision of German domination. Nordstadt. While planning to conquer Europe, Hitler also envisioned building entirely new cities to serve as monuments to Nazi power. Nordstadt, planned for construction near Trondheim, Norway, was to be one of the most ambitious, a naval hub, cultural center, and symbol of German dominance in the north. The city was designed to house 300,000 Germans and would feature a museum of German art, a grand war cemetery, and a towering memorial celebrating Nordic. The city was designed for some reason, and the problem was mess. Nazi mythology tied the location to supposed Aryan origins, with plans for lavish cultural festivals celebrating Germanic gods. Top naval commanders supported Nordstadt due to its strategic position, offering control over the North Atlantic. Hitler described it as a German Singapore, a fortress city commanding critical sea lanes. An autobahn was planned to connect Nordstadt directly to Germany, running through Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, a highway linking the Reich to its northern stronghold. The city was key to Germany's expanded Atlantic Wall strategy, envisioned as a launching point for both defensive operations against Allied attacks and offensive operations across the Atlantic, including strikes against the United States. Nordstadt would serve as a base for the Kriegsmarine's Northern Fleet, controlling access to the Norwegian Sea and threatening Allied convoys supplying the Soviet Union. From here, German submarines and surface raiders would dominate the North Atlantic, strangling Britain's supply lines. The city's cultural elements weren't just decoration, they were psychological warfare. By building a massive, beautiful German city in conquered Norway, the Nazis would demonstrate their permanence. This wasn't temporary occupation, this was forever. Norwegian identity would be gradually erased, replaced with German culture radiating from this new capital. Labor for construction would come from concentration camps and enslaved workers. Thousands would die building monuments to their conquerors. The Grand War Cemetery wouldn't memorialize these victims. It would celebrate German soldiers who died conquering Norway, turning their invasion into heroic mythology. Nordstadt represents the Nazi vision of permanent occupation. They didn't just want to control territory, they wanted to transform it, building new cities that would Germanize the landscape itself. A Norwegian looking at Nordstadt would see their future: German architecture, German language, German culture, their own heritage slowly disappearing under the weight of the Reich. The city was never built. Norway was liberated. But the plans existed, detailed and ready for implementation. If Germany had won, Nordstadt would be standing today, a monument to conquest at the top of the world. The global new order. Nazi ambitions didn't stop at Europe or even the Americas. Hitler and his allies envisioned a complete reorganization of the entire planet. Every continent, every ocean, every nation, either conquered, allied, or destroyed. Africa would be split three ways: Northern Africa under Italian control, Central Africa under German rule, with colonies providing resources and slave labor, Southern Africa under a pro-Nazi Afrikaner regime, ensuring white supremacist governments controlled the continent from Cairo to Cape Town. Asia and the Pacific would see German communities across China, Japan, Australia, India, and the Dutch East Indies, used to advance anti-communist sentiment and undermine Allied authority. In Tibet, the Nazis planned to start an anti-British rebellion, weaponizing local resentment against colonial rule. Germany retained claims to its pre-WY Pacific colonies, New Guinea, Samoa, and considered selling them to Japan as part of their alliance. Hitler believed Australia and New Zealand would eventually be colonized by Japanese settlers, with white populations either expelled or enslaved. In Palestine, the Nazis planned to establish a puppet Arab regime hostile to Zionism, not because they cared about Arabs, but to destabilize British control. The broader vision included a greater Arab Union, aligned with Nazi Germany, with Saudi Arabia treated as a strategic ally providing oil for the Reich's war machine. Iran, considered racially Aryan, and they're supposedly immune to Nazi racial laws, was targeted for an anti-Allied revolt. Germany planned to turn the country into a major Axis partner, using it as a bridge between the European Reich and Asian conquests. Afghanistan would be transformed into a client state under Amanullah Khan, serving as a forward base against British influence in India. Central Asia's Turkic populations would be targeted for military recruitment and eventual Germanization. India would be divided, Germany controlling the western part, modern-day Pakistan, and Japan annexing the rest. The subcontinent's resources and massive population would fuel both empires' continued expansion. In the Americas, Germany and Japan aimed to challenge U.S. dominance even before direct invasion. Japan planned to seize the Panama Canal and convert Central America into a colonial hub under Tokyo's command. The Nazis sought to dominate South America economically, using German expatriates, Lutheran networks, and local fascist groups as infiltration vectors. Short-term focus was on Nazifying German communities and creating espionage networks. Long-term goals included political penetration through coups and separatist projects. The Führermuseum Plan and Guyana Project envisioned Axis-aligned many states across the continent. Hitler expressed desire to found a new Germany in Brazil, expanding into surrounding countries through German-speaking settler communities and fascist gauchos, South American cowboys converted to Nazi ideology. The Deutsche Fernsehrundfunk television propaganda network would blanket the globe. Launched in 1935 as the world's first regular TV service, the Nazis planned to install giant 2-meter-wide screens in town squares, laundromats, beer halls, and factories across the Reich and occupied territories, broadcasting propaganda 24/7. Programming included Aryan family shows like Family Chronicles and An Evening with Hunts and Galley, live Nazi rallies, and even public executions to terrify citizens. The network aimed to replace radio entirely with a communal TV tower in every village. Engineers designed mobile TV vans to beam signals into rural areas. Himmler pushed for loyalty tests, where viewers had to report on neighbors who didn't clap for broadcasts, turning television into a surveillance and compliance system. Every screen would be a window into the regime's ideology, and every viewer would be watched in return. The global new order reveals the ultimate scope of Nazi megalomania. They imagined controlling every continent, reshaping every culture, dominating every economy. The entire planet would be reorganized according to racial hierarchy. Germans at the top, allies and servants below, and inferior races at the bottom, or eliminated entirely. This wasn't just European fascism, it was a blueprint for planetary totalitarianism, and they were already implementing pieces of it, proving these weren't just fantasies, but active plans being executed as far as Nazi power could reach. If they'd won, we'd be living in this world. Africa enslaved, Asia divided between Axis powers, the Americas under constant threat, and every television screen in every home broadcasting Nazi propaganda. The globe itself would be a prison, with no escape, no alternative, no hope, just the swastika flying over every continent until the end of time.